Vice President Kamala Harris broke a 50-50 tie on a procedural motion Thursday as the Senate prepared to debate the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill.
The President votes in the affirmative, and the motion to proceed is agreed to.
Now, Democrats made 11th-hour changes aimed at ensuring they could pull President Joe Biden's top legislative priority through the precariously divided chamber. And for no other reason than to put off the final vote, Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican from Wisconsin, forced the entire 28 pages of Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill to be read aloud on the U.S. Senate floor beginning Thursday afternoon. The senator reportedly said his goal was to educate the American public as to what was actually in that bill. Well, and then there were three. On the heels of Texas and Mississippi, the governor of Alabama says she plans on lifting the mask mandate in her state.
As of Tuesday, Alabama's 7-day average for new COVID-19 cases was 778 per day. You know, that's an 82% drop from the high reached on January 10th and the lowest average for daily new cases since late June. But let me be abundantly clear. After April the 9th, I will not keep the mask order in effect.
Alabama Governor Kay Ivey said she wants to keep the mask order in effect through Easter. So for another 5 weeks before lifting it by April 9th, Governor did say she was extending the state's safer at home order until May 7th, which urges residents to minimize travel outside of the home. And if you're in line to get a COVID-19 vaccine, church leaders are advising you stay away from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine if possible. The announcement was made by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, who say the way the vaccine was produced poses a problem for people of faith. So what's the story behind all of this? Well, it's pretty simple. Unlike its counterparts from Moderna and Pfizer, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was produced in part through the cell lines from aborted human fetuses. Now, this could pose a problem for many, especially following this announcement from the Biden administration. The bishops went short of telling people to avoid the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but to explore all other options. Greg, back to you.
Mike, thank you so much. First of all, let me say welcome to Alabama. Welcome to the club. The Neanderthal Club is what the president called us yesterday. I want to bring John Graves in here, a Victory News contributor. John, that whole thing with Johnson & Johnson, I liked the fact that it was one injection, but now this revelation, does that change things for a believer?
I think for people, I think for people of faith, it absolutely does. When you're taking the aborted fetus of a baby that obviously is being murdered, his life is being ended prematurely, and you're using that to put it in, it's all kinds of problems, but morally among it. I like the way you said it the other day, the way even these Catholic bishops just said it. Look at all your other options. And, you know, people have to understand there are valid treatments. It's not out there. And what happens is you don't give way to fear. If God tells you to do something, this is information you need to consider in this. There's problems with all the vaccines. You just need to do your own research. And so it's a difficult decision, but when you're taking fetus cells of an aborted baby, that's when it changes things to me.
What we've officially said here on the news at Victory, our stand is we won't shame you for wearing a mask, not wearing a mask. If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you don't want to wear it, don't wear it. If you want to get the vaccine, we're not telling you to get a vaccine. We're not endorsing vaccines. If you want to get it, get it. If you don't want to get it, we're not going to shame you for that as well. That's the way we believe here.
It's really what you said the other day. It's really the priesthood of the believers. Believers can make their own decisions. They can hear God. They can read the Word. We're not relying on someone else to tell us what to do. That's the problem in the current culture is too many people are defaulting. It's kind of a lazy approach, and some of it's a fear-based approach. Let the government be God. Let the government tell you what to do. And what we're saying to people is you need to go hear God, do some of your own research. even masks. You did the story with Mike on the mask mandates that are now all of a sudden lifting, and everyone keeps assuming a false security or a false safety in these masks, and the evidence doesn't support it. Go do your own research. Look at all the states that didn't do mask mandates, haven't had them for a year, and they're doing better than all the states that had them. And so be careful what your trust is in, whether it's a vaccine, a mask, or not doing it, or whatever. You need to be sensitive to what God's telling you to do.
UPI is reporting that AccuWeather just upgraded its cost estimate for last month's deadly storm to about $155 billion. According to the report, a majority of that, $130 billion in damage and economic losses, took place in Texas alone. The previous AccuWeather storm estimate for the storm came in at 50 to 60 billion. UPI is reporting that at least 58 deaths have been attributed to that storm. The people who were in charge of that, ERCOT, their CEO, was fired. Finally, there's some accountability being dished out following this last month's fatal blackouts, and I say fatal blackouts here in the state of Texas. ERCOT is in the midst of an organizational shakeup after CEO Bill Magnus's firing was announced on Wednesday. Magnus was given a 60-day termination notice by the company's board of directors. ERCOT, which oversees 90% of Texas power grid, came under fire for downplaying the severity of the winter weather. At least 40, and here's why it matters, and I've heard from some of you who said, why do you guys keep talking about Texas? It's all about Texas. At least 40 Texans died due to those decisions during the severe weather here in Texas. John, I want to bring you back in on these thoughts as things do seem to be changing a little bit in the way that was handled.
Yeah, and really there's lessons, but this is, like you said, I like the way you said it. The reason this is a painful lesson is not about the 150 billion, it's about those 40 lives that should not have been lost had this been handled properly. They didn't warn about it. They went too far to the other extreme. We had 23% of the grid on the wind turbines and solar. That 23% dropped to 3%. And so they didn't react soon enough, and there's heavy, heavy consequences. I don't think this CEO will be the last that we hear of this. I think there's going to be political ramifications. It's ironic that the COVID mask mandate is shaking up things in the political, in Texas and in other states, but this storm is really going to shake it, and Texas got hit very, very tough through this process. It's a painful lesson, but somebody needs to do the right thing now and clean this up.
You mentioned COVID and the COVID bill that you saw the vice president come in and make the deciding vote because they were split 50-50. That's the way the Senate is right now. And so she has to come in when there's a tie. And I asked, some people have asked us, and thank you for all the emails and letters that we get. We appreciate it. Can't answer all of them, but thank you. We were asked, why is it that the Democrats, you'll see 3 Republicans break, you'll see 5 Republicans break, but you rarely see maybe just one, Manchin, on the Democrats. What side? Why do they stay together? And I came up with this theory, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong here, that they groupthink. The Democrats are tribal, and that's why they want to. Fear is their motivator. They're afraid that they can't control the middle part of the country, and so this is why they shut down free speech. It's why they do the things that they do. Am I wrong?
No, that's exactly right. It's not just shutting down free speech. It's religious freedom, any way that you could speak back, talk back. And the challenge that people have on the conservative or right side of these debates is that they believe in independent thought. They believe in those discussions. And so they can sometimes have their own opinions about this and not just follow what they're told to do, which is what happens mostly on the left. I thought it was interesting when you did that story. I had to kind of smile to myself because yesterday Biden was bragging about the overwhelming unity, that everybody's all behind this. I'm like, overwhelming unity? It's exactly the opposite. It's 50-50. And remember, that tiebreaker was not to pass the bill. It was just to start the debate. So there's some things in the bill that you know, people could break over, the minimum wage of $15, those kind of things. We don't know if it's going to go through or not. And this is a troubling one. You know, the problem is 9% of that bill goes to help people with vaccines, and 1% with vaccines and 9% with the COVID. All the rest of it is just pork. And so that's the problem with these things, is the government just keeps going and going and going, and somebody's got to pay for that. We're paying for that.
We deliver the news here every day, and it's not always pleasant news. One of the things I appreciate about you since we've been working together after the election is the fact that you have a unique ability to take what is in reality, the things that we're reporting, and then you have a way of being able to pivot and put that in perspective for people. I know a lot of people are watching, and we get people thinking, look, I don't even know how to react to these things. Take a moment and just tell people, how do you do it? How do you take what is usually bad news or not such good news and pivot to make it sound and discern what the news is telling us?
You know, the prayer I have, and I have to pray this for myself before I talk to anyone else, and so my heart for people is this is a very confusing time. It's a very dark time. Remember Psalm 23, though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, there's dark news and bad things happening, and freedoms are being lost on all kinds of levels. The sons of Issachar, to me, is what I come back to over and over. It wasn't just knowing the news. The problem is knowledge puffs up, remember, and love builds up. The more we get knowledge, that leads to depression if you can't do like the sons of Issachar. They discerned the times, the bad news and the good news, but they also knew what to do about it. So I take this in and process it. You got to be very careful, which is why I love what Victory News is doing. We're not just giving you more and more knowledge and more information. Something more powerful than knowledge is wisdom, knowing what to do with that knowledge as a believer to try to bring life to other people and hope to other people. So that's the way I try to process it. And it's difficult work in these times, but if everyone out there can say, hey, with the information I get, what am I supposed to do that's going to bring life?
Right.
To me, that's what is what we got to stay focused on.
Just days ago, Victory News was reporting that the National Guard troops at the U.S. Capitol could be heading home by mid-March. Now, as UPI is reporting, the Capitol Police have asked that the Defense Department to extend the Guard's deployment by 2 months. Officials are said to be reviewing that request. The current mission for the 5,000 or so National Guardsmen is set to end on March 12th. National Guard troops were initially deployed to the Capitol on January 6th after rioters breached the building. And the problem at the border appears to be worse than is being reported. According to the Western Journal, a document leaked from the Department of Health and Human Services shows that there is a large number of child migrants crossing the border and that those children are stretching the Biden administration's resources. As reported by Axios, in the last week of February, 321 children a day were being taken into HHS custody. As the Journal report says, that number had been a weekly average of 203 children just 1 month earlier. The report says emergency shelter space is just about reaching capacity. And authorities in New Zealand urge people to evacuate to higher ground or inland and to remain there until officials say it's safe to go home after a series of earthquakes struck Friday off the country's coast.
We're asking those that have moved to high ground or inland to remain where you are until the official all clear is given. The official all clear will be given when we have the advice that it is right to do so.
The largest was a powerful magnitude 8.1 earthquake, which prompted thousands of people to evacuate and triggered tsunami warnings across the South Pacific. The warnings caused traffic jams as people scrambled to evacuate, but the quakes didn't appear to pose a widespread threat to lives or major infrastructure because of the remoteness of where they hit. The largest struck about 620 miles off the coast of New Zealand. Greg, back to you.
Thank you. John, I'm going to bring you back in on this. Listen, we cannot allow ourselves to get in fear when we hear these things. Jesus warned us that we would see these things. Yes. Earthquakes. This is the earth groaning because of the weight of sin that's in it. John?
Yeah, the birth pains. It's the birth pains of his coming. He says, one of the passages that means so much to me is 1 Peter 4:12, where he says, don't be surprised by the fiery trials. And I thought it was interesting in my spirit as Mike was covering those stories. What are the kind of storms that we're seeing? Storms in the natural. We got ice storms, we got earthquakes, we got the birth pains of that, but there's also storms in the culture. There's storms of Marxism and socialism trying to shut down religious freedoms. And so our responsibility as believers is to say, hey, we're not surprised by the fiery trials. We're prepared for them. It's when, what you said earlier, is the two extremes is, oh, it's messy, oh, it's complicated, oh, it's frustrating, oh, it's hopeless, so let's just bury our head in the sand. Or we just get mad and despondent. No, we look at the facts, but we know what to do. We have someone greater in us than all the storms of either kind, and that's what we have to keep coming back to, is be grounded in that and say, hey, we don't just watch it and endure it. We actually get to influence it.
While it seems like most of the Biden administration is quick to move on from the Trump presidency, one of Joe Biden's cabinet picks is making headlines for praising the former president. The president's pick to head up the Pentagon's policy division, Colin Powell, spoke in front of the Senate on Thursday. Now, during one particular exchange, Powell was asked about Donald Trump's decision to kill Iranian terrorist Qasem Soleimani.
I didn't shed a tear for the death of Qasem Soleimani for all the reasons that you mentioned, Senator Inhofe. I was concerned about the escalatory dynamics.
Is the world in a better
he's
position
gone.
now without him?
I think it probably is a better place without him.
Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma, lead Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee, reminded Colin Powell that at the time he predicted the killing would lead to possible war. Now, Senator Tom Cotton also grilled President Biden's nominee for Undersecretary of Defense this week. Here is some of what was said to the man who, if confirmed, could be the Pentagon's top policy official.
In 2017, when the U.S. recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, you wrote that the decision helps Iran and further isolated the U.S. in the Middle East. But since then, the U.S. has brokered landmark Mideast peace deals. In 2019, when the State Department issued new guidance about Israeli settlements, you wrote that the move would be dangerous and destabilizing to the Middle East. But no such destabilization happened. Indeed, those peace deals happened. In 2018, when President Trump warned Iran against restarting its nuclear program, you wrote that war drums are already sounding. So, Dr. Cole, while you spent the last 4 years warning about impending wars that never happened, when Mideast policy was your job at the Pentagon, you failed to foresee the rise of ISIS, which launched an actual war involving 30,000 Islamic insurgents conquering a quarter of Iraq. Dr. Cole, it seems to me that your judgments about matters of war and peace are almost always.
Your candor, Senator. To state the obvious, the last few years have been pretty polarizing on social media. I'm sure there are times that I got swept up in that. There were a number of positions that President Trump took that I strongly opposed. I think the language that I used in opposing those was sometimes disrespectful, and for that I apologize.
No word yet on when a vote over Dr. Call's nomination could take place. Greg, back to you.
Thanks. I want to bring John Graves in. As I circle back to this Dr. Call in the Middle East, when you look at this and you try to understand, here's the problem. They don't have a spirit man that's alive, most of them. I'm not saying he's a believer or not. I don't know him. But you can't understand what's happening in the Middle East if you don't understand this book. That many of the things that are happening have a spiritual side to us and not just a natural side. This is why you encourage people to be involved and to run for office. John?
Exactly. And to me, I love the analogy you used the other day that the former president, President Trump, was like one of the judges or prophets in the Old Testament. He was rough around the edges, but he was a bold leader. Look at all those stories. 5 presidents, Democrats and Republicans, the last 5 promised to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and they all backed out of their promise, and no one held them account. Trump was the only one who did it, and everyone, including this Dr. Cal, was like, oh, it's going to lead to war. It's going to be war. It was a historic Mideast peace treaty after peace treaty after peace treaty no one wants to talk about. That's bold leadership. And the people watching us today, you could be one of those citizen legislatures, maybe at your school board, city council, state house, go get involved and have bold leadership. Do what God tells you to do. You don't have to be rough around the edges, okay? You don't have to send nasty tweets, but you can still get out there and lead and do the right thing, and you can be the change agent.
Yeah, it wasn't he decided to move the embassy or they didn't move it. It was a law passed by Congress that the embassy would be, I think it's the Jerusalem Embassy Act, would be in Jerusalem, not Tel Aviv. And no one would follow the law because the State Department largely said, you're going to start World War III. And it didn't happen. Instead, we got record deals.
And remember in Proverbs, I love the scripture where people who get timid, there's a lion in the street, there's a lion in the street. Or in Ecclesiastes, I think it is, he who watches the wind does not sow. If you're looking for the fearful thing and what might go wrong, you don't do what's the right thing to do. We as believers just do the right thing and we leave the consequences up to God. That's what we have to do. And so that's what people need to begin to work through. All of these stories, there's what's perceived to be, and then there's what's happening underneath. And that's what believers are called to see. Like Jesus, he didn't make a judgment by the seeing of his eye or the hearing of his ear. He made right judgments. He had discernment. And that's what we need to be praying for, especially in these times.
John, I don't think I could have said it better. And that's really what it boils down to. This is what faith is all about. We have faith in Jesus that he's going to take care of us. And when has he never done that, John? When has he never done it?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, now remember, sometimes that faith means we go through hard times. Sometimes the church is at its finest hour in difficult times. There have been difficult times all the way through the history, the biblical history, and in our own history. The issue is God's not afraid to allow us to suffer, to go through difficult regimes or governments or whatever, but the body of Christ is the one who has the answer for the world. We don't need to cower. We don't need to bow down. We don't need to just give away all of our freedoms and rights. This nation was founded on that, and we need to be the people that stand and make sure we hold on to what we have and begin to turn things around.
So very true. One of these days I want to ask you, when we get a time, how you do that, how you talk to people who disagree with you and don't see things the way you do. We don't have time today, but we'll save it.
Nope.
We'll get to it. Thank you so much,
I'd love it.
John, for being with us.